Okay, so this video is to share my thoughts with you on Chapter 1 from They Say, I Say. And Chapter 1's title is They Say. So we are starting with that first and ultimately very important component, which Graf and Birkenstein say means you should begin with your ideas by starting with what other people are saying. So right away on page 19 and 20, they go back to that idea of a professor standing on stage and discussing, and how without some sort of context for the discussion, the listeners are lost. I like to make an analogy to another real life situation just to help you understand how important it is for us to start with what other people are saying as a way to begin our positioning language. So when we use they say, I say concepts in our papers, I'm going to refer to it as positioning language, because a writer needs to indicate clearly not only their thesis, but also their position on the larger conversation that thesis is responding to. So when I think of positioning language, it makes me think of maps, right? And if we were in class together, I would have you raise your hands and tell me how many of you have ever been lost. And most of you will admit to have been lost every once in a while, though GPS certainly helps you out nowadays. Then I ask how many people have been on the receiving end of a phone call when other people are lost. More of you raise your hands. It is frustrating when you are on the receiving end of the phone call trying to help somebody find their way, if that person cannot give you one single piece of information in the beginning. And that piece of information is, where are you? Right? Where are you? If they look around themselves and all they can tell you is, I'm near a cornfield, well, that doesn't help us much in rural Illinois, right? Once they tell you a landmark or an address, then you can start giving them proper instructions about where to go from there, right? If you tell them you're in downtown Geneseo on State Street and you're trying to get out to the McDonald's, then you can help them. But until that point, you can't help them. So the positioning language here in our papers works much the same way. If you don't give the reader an indication of who you're looking at to start from, then they don't know where you are in the conversation. They won't know if you're with somebody in support. They won't know if you're against it. They won't have an understanding of the broader context. So this positioning language is really important. And the they say group, right? The group of people that we identify as being the they group is hugely important as the first step in knowing how to then position yourself. So, because you're entering that conversation, you need to start with what other people are saying, and then you introduce your ideas in a way that positions your ideas as a direct response. And I know that on page 20, it talks about the fact that the order of this information is super important. It is very important that you start with the other people, right? You don't start with yourself. You don't start with your thesis statement. You start with what other people are saying, so that by the time you get to what you want to say, your position will be much more clear to your readers, okay? So they give some advice in these first couple pages of the chapter about how to do it when you're the writer. And so the most important things to remember is that you're going to do it soon, which means that it's going to come relatively quickly in your piece. And we'll talk about a couple variations here in a moment. It also means that you're going to do it succinctly. The word succinct means that you use the least amount of words possible. When someone speaks succinctly, they are using their words carefully and getting to the point quickly. So when you are incorporating whoever your they group is, you're going to do it pretty early in the paper, and you're going to do it with really few words, right? Or you can at least accomplish it with really few words. I know that some students have had fears in the past that, well, is my paper supposed to be all about what other people say and then I don't get to have a say? That's not what this means at all. This is a baseline, right? This is baseline data. This is a point of reference from which the rest of your paper can be structured. So if you're writing a short essay, and by short essay, I mean think of like, a timed writing. If you have to do an argumentative timed writing someday in a college class, or if you are writing a paper like we are in here that's about 3 pages long, then you want to get the job done within 1 or maybe 2 paragraphs. I wouldn't go any farther than that, right? If you have a longer conversation, if you're writing a 20-page paper, you could maybe have a 1 or 2 paragraph interesting introduction, and then maybe get to your they say, I say language by paragraph 3 or paragraph 4. You're still going to do it relatively soon in the paper. If it's a 20-page paper and you get that they say, I say information by page 2, it's still within the first 10% of the paper. So you want to do it early, right? Because you don't want to dwell on the larger conversation, right? You don't want to sound like a mindless parrot. That's not the point of this. Your point is not to tweet out what every single other person in the universe says. The idea is you pick one voice, at least, at minimum, one voice that you're going to reference that has an opinion about this topic. And then after that, you can position yourself somewhere in a spectrum of being either with them or sort of with them or against them, okay? So you're going to think of the brief description of that larger conversation and then your I say statement as a unit that stands together. Think of it as like 2 sides of the same coin, right? What other people are saying is the heads. What you are saying is the tails. You can't have the heads without the tails. The coin comes together, but that coin needs to be placed in the beginning of the essay, and the head side always needs to go first, okay? So keep that in mind. All right, by the time you get to page 22, they've got several different examples of passages that demonstrate incorporating this sort of they group idea. So if you go to page 22 and you look at the top, we have a passage by George Orwell from an essay called Politics in the English Language. And your textbook writers, Graf and Birkenstein, do a really nice job of kind of summarizing what the they group is saying. You have another one down at the bottom of 22 to the top of 23 where an anecdote is being used. That anecdote basically functions as a they say, okay? And the group that is being used in that anecdote is readers, right? Book lovers. Book lovers is actually the language. So if you take a look at those examples on 22 and 23, you can start to see how real life writers are doing this. By 23, we start to get into the templates. And remember, this book is all about templates. So you're going to be able to study these templates and the language that's being used. They always present this information with kind of the easiest to understand first, and then they move forward into more complicated templates. So the first thing I'm going to tell you right here, and you can look at some of them on page 23, if you know the person or group to whom you want to respond, if you know them by name, if it's an individual single person and you know about that person by name, name it. If it's a certain group of people, right? Like on page 23, the first example says, a number of sociologists have recently suggested that X's work has several fundamental problems. Well, clearly you want to respond to this particular group of sociologists who have these beliefs about X's work. If you know the group you want to respond to, then name them directly. That's the easiest way to do this. Sometimes, though, we don't want to name an audience directly, and so we get to the second type of template right here. Sometimes you've got a viewpoint that is so wide and broad that your textbook references it as the standard view. And the standard view just means this is a way that lots and lots of people think. And this type of template pattern is useful if you want to call out an idea without making the audience feel in particular that they are in trouble or they have a problem. I'm so sorry that there's a glitch here and you cannot see me anymore, but we're just going to keep rolling with the notes since we're already like 5 or 10 minutes into this. On page 24, you've got several templates. The first one at the top identifies Americans, right? That's going to be a standard view because there are so many millions of Americans out there that to just say Americans, you're not representing just one person, but sort of a general thought process. Conventional wisdom is another phrase you can use for the standard view. Common sense, right? Generally, we don't point out common sense unless we think the people that we're talking about don't have it. Literally, you can use the word standard way of thinking. You could phrase it as something that you've heard lots of people say. Second template from the bottom there, you can also incorporate second person language. You would think that. So there are formal ways and informal ways to do this, but when you pick the standard view, you are trying to take a little bit of pressure off of naming somebody directly while still identifying that viewpoint. Okay, the third one, the templates are on page 24 and 25, and what's happening there is that instead of representing the standard view as being from somebody else, you could present the standard view as being something within yourself. The key to this one is generally that you're probably going to have shown growth, or you're going to show a difference. Like you've matured and you've changed your mind about something, and now you've got some new insight into whatever it is you want to talk about after thinking about it more. I had a conversation with a student the other day talking about their paper, and they wanted to define the idea of a best friend, and they're going to use what they used to think about friendship, right? So they're going to use their self as their they group, basically like, here's what I used to think it meant to have a best friend. And now that I've gone through this life experience that I'm about to tell you about, here's how I realize I was wrong. So that's what's kind of nice about these template patterns. You also have a really nice one at the end of that group. So now you're at the top of page 25, second template pattern at the top of 25. It allows you to recognize paradoxical thinking. So look at that sentence structure. At the same time that I believe blank, I also believe blank. So you can hold two contradicting ideas together. Here's an example. At the same time that I believe teenagers need rules, I also believe that they need freedom. Notice that the order of that sentence puts the emphasis, the power position is on freedom. Listen to what happens when I flip that. At the same time that I believe students need freedom, I also believe that they need rules. So do you see how that power position idea functions? It's really important to pay attention to who is coming second. Oh, look, I'm glitchy moving over here again. How awkward. Okay. Sometimes, and now we're getting into the more tricky, interesting patterns here. Sometimes you want to pull things out of a conversation that people are not saying, but you know that they mean it, right? So here we have from Graff and Birkenstein, it says sometimes you want to pull out an idea that may be not commonly known or identified, so you have to make the implicit explicit. Look at these templates on page 25. Although none of them have ever said so directly, my teachers have often given me the impression that education will open doors. Okay? Sometimes I have students take these templates and try practicing one of them on your own. I think that's a good idea, you know? Although my parents never say so directly, they apparently assume blank. In previous years, I've had students say things like, although students never say so directly, they are often thankful for the effort that their teachers put into their lessons. Something along those lines. You're taking what's not being spoken, but you're recognizing the subtext of that moment, and you are putting it into a sentence so that it can be discussed. All right, flip the page to 26. Starting on the bottom of 25 and moving into 26, they recognize that there are some topics that are so giant and so controversial, and people have been arguing about them so long, think abortion, death penalty, cloning, etc., that it would probably be a good idea for you to summarize both sides of that debate before you jump in and give your own ideas. There's some specific reasons why carefully laying out both sides equally and evenly is a good idea for you in terms of ethics. First of all, it's really, really easy when you disagree with somebody to make a they say statement that is not quite accurate to what they truly believe. right? It's easy for people to summarize poorly and then end up making a caricature of that group. That's not okay. If you want to know more about that problem, then you can read chapter 2, The Art of Summarizing. We want to make sure that we avoid caricatures of the other group. So one of the ways to do that is to give a fair assessment of what this side says and a fair assessment of what the opposite side says, and then you tell the audience where you are. It is going to structure your essay by making you look like you're a good listener, by making it look like you have done your homework and that you have been fair. So you've got a couple templates here that can do that for you. In fact, the template on page 26 even offers you 3 opinions. So maybe it's such a large conversation that there's not just 2 ways to think about it, there's 3 or 4 ways to think about it. And so this is a nice pattern for you to use if you end up with one of those types of ideas. Okay. They give you another example on page 27 that they then link to an actual writer, Thomas Frank, that uses that pattern. So it's not the exact same thing, but if you compare the template to what Thomas Frank has going on, oh, hey, I'm back. The camera is working again. Then you can see that basically it's saying one way to do this is by starting off with, here's what everybody agrees with, and here's where their agreement misses, right? That we are a nation divided is an almost universal lament of this bitter election year. However, the exact property that divides us, elemental though it is said to be, remains a matter of some controversy, right? So when it comes to the topic of our electorate, most of us will readily agree that we're not getting along. But where this agreement usually ends, however, is on the question of what makes us not get along. Some people are convinced that it's a matter of morality. Some people are convinced that it's a matter of economics. Others argue that it's a matter of race, right? So you can see how these templates can work in real life. So the last couple things, don't forget that you're going to keep what other people say in mind, not just in the beginning of your paper, but throughout the rest of your paper, because it's a nice way to keep refocusing your audience on the importance of the subject matter. So especially when you're starting to write 10, 15, 20-page papers, circling back and dropping your audience little breadcrumbs about what other people think and your response to that position is really helpful organizationally. Let's see. Okay. I do have written here that you should try the exercises from the end of this chapter. This is what I would normally have students do if they were in front of me. But since you guys are going to be doing some lessons through the online textbook, I am fine if you just do the tutorial for Inquisitive. If you have major questions about what a they group is, please let me know right away. We're going to be doing some activities where I try to walk you through reading articles and recognizing who the they group is. And I just want to define that really clearly one more time here at the end of this video. Your they group, and I'm using the term group loosely, is going to be either a single person, a group of people, or an organization that takes a stand or some kind of action on the topic that you've picked. Sometimes students get they group and subject matter mixed up. They're not the same thing. Your they group is a single person, group of people, or an organization that either say something about your topic or they take some sort of action that clearly represents how they feel about the subject matter. Okay? That's who we're looking for in terms of our they group, and we're going to be doing some practice here in the next several days trying to find them in real life articles.